I'm a seasonal caretaker at a national park in Alaska. I won't say which one, because I still value my job and I've been warned by my employers to keep my mouth shut about anything unusual I've seen during my time here. That being said, there are some very strange things that I've seen over the last 3 years I've held this position, and I figured I'd share some with you. You may not even be aware of what a seasonal caretaker is, and that's completely understandable. Generally, it's not that exciting, if I'm being honest. I start my season when the park is closed for the winter, and it's my responsibility to make sure that the various cabins and public buildings are maintained, and the snow is kept clear from the roofs to prevent any damage, that sort of thing. It's a lonely job, and if you're a people person, it's probably not for you. It takes a bit of an odd duck to willingly put themselves into exile for 3 months at a time, knowing that there's no way out until the snow begins to melt, and the plows can start clearing some of the access roads that lead out to my cabin. I do have a snowmobile that I can use to take the 3-hour trip to the nearest ranger station if I need to, but it's not like a quick trip to the corner store. It's just fine for me though. I've always been a loner, and I have Max, my Jack Russell Terrier, to keep me company. The job isn't very demanding. I typically only spend a few days each week tending to my responsibilities, and the rest of the time is mine to do with as I please. A few years ago, I took up nature photography as a hobby to pass the time, and have even had a few of my pictures published by an organization you'd recognize by name. I have framed copies of those magazines hanging on the wall behind me right now, as a matter of fact. A lot of people come through this park during the more temperate months. It's probably one of the most popular places for outdoorsy folks to come explore in this region of Alaska. In the winter months, however, it's completely deserted except for a few lonely ranger stations and the like. I'll go for weeks at a time without seeing a soul, and the only person I speak with any regularity is my ranger buddy. We'll call him Rick, who I check in with a few times a week on the radio. Aside from that, it's just me and Max. I'm not sure how best to go about telling you about some of the things I've seen up here in the dark, frozen days of winter. So I'll just dive right in and tell you about the shades. At least, that's what I call them when I'm talking to myself. I have no idea what they really are, but when the winter storms are blowing strong against my shuttered cabin windows, and the visibility in the snow and dim light are next to nothing, you'll see them. It's almost like looking at someone moving behind a pane of frosted glass, all indistinct and shadowy. At first, I just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, finding patterns in that chaotic static of all that falling snow. But then I started hearing them as well, like murmuring just loud enough to hear over the howl of the wind, but too quiet to recognize them as any sort of intelligent speech. It's enough to set you on edge, I can tell you that much. They tend to only show up during a heavy snowstorm, and the fiercer the storm, the closer they'll come to the cabin. It's gotten to the point where I make sure I've locked my doors and windows long before nightfall, if I know there is a storm coming. One time, during an especially nasty blizzard, I could actually hear them moving all around my cabin, like some sort of nightmare parade. That night was bad. At one point, I actually saw and heard the doorknob on my front door turning, all slow and deliberate, accompanied by what sounded like soft scratching at the wood surface. The worst of it, and I'll swear on a stack of Bibles that it's the truth, was the faint whispering voice that kept calling my name just on the other side of the door. That went on for an hour or more, and even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear that cold, hollow voice. It's what I would imagine a person would sound like if their soul were ripped from their body. I suppose I'm being a little overly dramatic, but it's the only way I can describe it. Alive, but also lifeless. I don't know a better way to explain it. No reason to dwell on it, I guess. I will say that I'm not sure what would have happened if I hadn't remembered to throw the deadbolt that night. But I'm not interested in finding out. Just thinking about it makes me anxious. I mentioned it to Rick the next day after the storm had quieted, when I could get a radio signal out. I expected him to laugh at me for letting myself get all spooked by the dark, but he didn't. He very calmly and firmly told me that it was better not to talk about them at all, and to just make sure I kept myself locked up nice and tight when the heavy snowstorms came. I tried to prod him for more information, but he just refused to elaborate any further. The only thing he would add was that not everything sleeps when winter comes on up here. I have to admit, he creeped me out more than a little with that singer. He definitely knows something about them, and I'm going to try and pin him down one day and get more information. The next thing on the list is the car graveyard. I swear to you, if you explore far enough off the beaten trail out here, chances are pretty good you'll find one. A car or truck just inexplicably deposited in the middle of backwater Alaska. Like that makes any sense at all. The first one I ever saw was an early 2000s BMW coupe, looking like it was just off the showroom floor, except for the fact that half of it was embedded in an old spruce that had probably stood there since before the car even existed. It almost looked like the tree had grown around the car, or maybe the car had been interposed into the tree. I don't know how it's possible. I just know that it was there. I've seen a few of them during my time here, sometimes trapped in the trees like that BMW, and sometimes just sitting in the middle of an open space of ground. Every one of them looked like they were fresh off the road, and none of them had any logical way they could have gotten out there, even without the hole stuck in the trees part. The most unnerving thing about the cars, though, is the clothing. I've stopped looking and just tend to avoid going anywhere near one if I see it. But the first time I saw one, my curiosity led me to check it out. I tried to open the doors, but they were all locked. When I looked in through the windows, though, I saw the damnedest thing. In the front seats, it looked like someone had laid out clothes, pants, shirts, socks, shoes, the whole deal, and strapped the seatbelt around them. It was like the people in the car had just vanished in mid-drive, leaving their clothes behind just the way they'd been wearing them. Eerie is one word for it, but if I'm being honest, it scared the hell out of me. The other thing about the cars is that you won't find the same one twice. When I saw that first BMW, I came back out the next day with my camera to take a picture of it, but it wasn't there anymore. I thought I'd simply forgotten where it was, or that I'd gotten turned around. But when I saw my boot prints in the snow from the day before, I knew I was in the right spot. I tried to report this to the ranger as well, but Rick told me they wouldn't even send anyone out to investigate them anymore. By the time anyone got there, they'd be gone. Apparently, reports of this sort of thing have been coming in periodically over the last 20 or 30 years, and nobody knows anything about them. He did tell me that one of the rangers had found one once. A school bus from Texas, if you can believe that. In each of the rows of seats were piles of empty clothes. With the exception of the driver, the ranger that found it said that the driver was sort of there, but not really. Almost like a blurry hologram frozen in time. He said that the driver, an elderly man, looked like he was frozen in some terrified scream, all wide-eyed and gaping mouth. The ranger tried to get into the bus using the rear emergency door, but when he got the door open, a loud buzzing sound filled his ears, and a high-frequency vibration ran through his body like an electric shock. He said the closer he got, the more intense the sound and sensation became. Before he could even take a step inside the bus, it grew so strong that he thought he was going to pass out. The best he could describe it was like when you have two strong, opposing magnets that you're trying to push together. The more you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. He said it was almost like the universe was somehow keeping him out of that bus, like he didn't belong in it. He stumbled away from it and spent the next day in bed, sicker than a dog. When he came back out a few days later with some of the other rangers, the bus was gone. I can't really speak for the buzzing and vibrating personally. I just know that I avoid them whenever I see them. They're just not right. The last thing I'll tell you about today is the bridge. About a mile or so away from my cabin, along a maintained footpath, there's a rope bridge that crosses a deep ravine. To the side of it, there's a bit of a rock jutting out that's used as a kind of observation point. You know what I mean, where hikers will stop and take selfies along their trek to post to Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The Parks Department went through the trouble of installing handrails along the edge of it to prevent anyone from falling to their death. Of course, there aren't any hikers here during the winter season. The park is technically closed and all roads leading into the area are blocked by chains to prevent anyone from driving in and getting into trouble with no possibility of rescue. I hike down that path probably once a week, looking for new photo opportunities to occupy my time. It's a beautiful walk and the whole landscape seems so crisp and fresh without people tromping all around it. I've gotten some incredible shots of the bridge, but I don't dare step out onto it when it's this cold though. The boards are constantly frozen and slick with ice. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't take much of a misstep to fall on my ass and slide out from under the waist-high rope handholds. I'd be falling 200 feet to the rocks below before I even realized what was happening. Here's the weird part though. Inevitably, when I reach that bridge, I'll find multiple sets of footprints leading up to the rocky outcropping, but none of them leading away from it. They'll come from all different directions, some from the path and others straight out of the trees, but they all seem to stop at the edge of the ravine. They're various sizes and stride lengths, some of which are very small, and others are so large they have to have been made by some hulk of a person. The first time I saw them, I was afraid that some trespassers had gotten too close to the edge and fallen over. But when I spent the better part of my day making my way carefully to the floor of the ravine, I couldn't find any sign that anyone had been there besides me. I'll be the first to admit that I'm no tracker, but even I can tell when footprints in fresh snow lead up to a place and don't return. I've walked out onto that outcropping myself once to see if I could figure out where all these people had gone. Maybe there was a hidden path that I wasn't seeing, but the moment my foot touched that stone, My head began to throb like I was suffering from the worst hangover I'd ever had. When I staggered back from it, the pain disappeared like it had never been there, and I was left with a pretty instant nosebleed for the rest of the afternoon as my only souvenir. I didn't try again. Max won't even go anywhere near it. He'll start whining as soon as we start approaching that part of the trail. Mind you, this is a dog that I've had to, on multiple occasions, wrestle inside the cabin because he was so incensed that a pack of wolves dared wander too close to his territory. For all of his small stature, he doesn't seem to have the self-preservation gene that tells him when he should be afraid of something. But not the overlook though. That's a different story altogether. Even Max has his limits, I guess. I have more stories, but I'm getting a little tired and it's about time for me to get some sleep. Tomorrow, I need to head out to the cabins by the frozen lake and make sure their roofs are clear. I'll write more later. Next time I'll tell you about the dead bears. That's a strange one.